What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be brewing up something very fun. Today's brew is going to be a strong fruit ale. This is a beer style that I've not made in a long time, but it's one that is certainly a lot of fun to make and not too difficult, all things considered, although it can be kind of expensive. But the reason why I'm brewing this beer today is actually quite unique. If you're a member of my Patreon at the highest level, you actually have the option to ask for a beer to be named after you or to be named kind of with the name of your choosing. Dave Carey is a longtime patron and a longtime supporter at this level. So he asked for the beer to be named Carry Me Home after him, and he also wanted this to be brewed as a strong fruit ale. Now, normally I don't take requests for the type of beer to be brewed, but in this case, I thought it'd be fun because I haven't brewed one of these in a while. 6 months later, I'm finally getting it done. Sorry for the wait, Dave. A lot of things happened between then and now. The beer I'm making today is modeled heavily after Soft Parade by Short's Brewing Company, which was the reference that Dave provided me here. Luckily, a lot of that beer's recipe is generally available on the brewery's website, so I just went ahead and filled in the blanks and came up with what I think is going to be a pretty solid fruit ale. I'm going to be doing this in one of the simplest ways possible by just adding in some fruit puree into the secondary and delivering some color and some fruit flavor that way, getting a little bit of mild tartness out of it, and I think a decent amount of body and a decent amount of alcohol as well. So it should be a lot of fun and relatively easy to make, especially with like a wheat base. Before we jump into the recipe though, let's give a quick shout out to those who helped make this video possible. Firstly, Northern Brewer, who provide the ingredients for this batch of beer, and I'm grateful for that because fruit purees are not cheap. And secondly, Clawhammer Supply, who make the system that I'll be making this beer on today. This is their 10-gallon 240-volt system, but they also have 10 and 20-gallon versions of both 120 and 240-volt systems for your electric brewing needs. Check them out. So I'm targeting a beer that's going to be between about 7 and 8% alcohol at the end of the process. It's a little bit tough to figure out what the actual gravity will be once I add the fruit purees into the fermentation, but there's a pretty good formula you can use, and we'll talk about that later. But for now, I'm targeting a base that'll get me an original gravity before I add the fruit puree of about 1068 or so. The beer I'm building as the base on this one is going to be a reasonably strong base, but full of fluffiness and body, and just it should be a very easy drinking, satisfying, but soft feeling beer. Similar to like a hazy IPA, just without hops, because we want the fruit flavors to stand out. We're gonna be starting out with about 10 pounds of Brew Pilsner malt for starters, just standard American Pilsner malt. Then we're gonna add 2 pounds each of flaked rye and white wheat malt. Both of these things together are going to amplify the puffiness, the fluffiness, the softness of this beer, while still giving it a nice amount of body. For hops in this beer, very, very simple, low level of hopping here, just a 60-minute bittering addition of half an ounce of nugget at 12.3 alpha acid. That's gonna give us about 17 IBUs of bitterness, keeping it sort of on the sweet side, but not too sweet. We want this to be a little bit balanced here. The water profile in this beer is very important in order to get the right effect here. So I'm gonna be amplifying the fullness and the softness of this particular mouthfeel. And the way to do that is to increase the level of chloride relative to the level of sulfate in the water profile. And so this is the profile I'm going for. 62 parts per million of calcium, 6 parts per million of magnesium, 24 parts per million of sodium, 109 parts per million of chloride, 74 parts per million of sulfate, and 0 parts per million of bicarbonate. Now, when it comes to the volumes of water, that's going to be slightly different than my typical brew day. Because I'm expecting a lot of losses from fruit absorption in the brewing of this beer, I'm actually making this to be a slightly larger volume of wort than I otherwise would. I'm trying to get about 6 gallons of wort into the fermenter to get us probably about 5 gallons of beer at the end of the process, because we don't want to take too much of that fruit sludge off. And because I tend to do no sparge brew days most of the time, I'm starting out with 8 3/4 of a gallon of reverse osmosis water for my mash water, and then I'll be adding to that 5 grams of calcium chloride, 2 grams of sodium chloride, 2 grams of Epsom, and 3 grams of gypsum. That should get us that water profile and should be enough for that volume of water. For the yeast in this beer, I'm using a co-pitch, actually. It's kind of rare that I do this, but I feel like it's appropriate in this case. I'm gonna be co-pitching US-05 and Lallemand Koln. I'm basically co-pitching a California ale strain with a Kolsch strain. I wanna get the fluffiness and the slight berry notes of the Kolsch yeast in there, but I want the attenuation and the performance of the American ale yeast as well. So putting those two things together not only gives me a great pitch rate because it's 2 packets of dry yeast and a relatively high OG wort, but also it's going to give me, I believe, the characteristics that I want for the best of both worlds, if that makes sense. For the mash in this beer, I'm mashing high and I'm mashing overnight. So I typically do an overnight mash nowadays because it's one of the easiest ways for me to get a brew day in, splitting it in half while still having time for my family. So I set my controller to hit my mash temperature target, I mash in and I turn off the pump and I hold it overnight at that mash temperature with my system, keeping the temperature consistent all the way through until I'm ready to carry on with the brew day the next day. It's worked so well for me in the past. I've actually won several awards on beers that have been made using this method this year, so I think it's definitely not taking anything away from the quality of the beer. I'm gonna be mashing this one pretty high relative to my usual stuff at 156 Fahrenheit. This is going to encourage more alpha amylase activity as opposed to beta amylase activity, which will get me a little bit more complex sugar construction of the wort. And this is going to ensure that we don't have as dry of a fermentation as we potentially could, especially when we're adding simple sugars from fruits later on in the process. The point here is to keep it from getting too dry, to give it a little bit of residual sweetness to really boost that fruit flavor in the end and get us what we want, while also retaining a little bit of body. And then finally, for the arguably centerpiece of this whole thing, the most important part, the fruit addition itself. So I'm gonna be using 3 separate purees of 3 separate fruits. I'm gonna be adding in 3 pounds each of raspberry puree, blackberry puree, and sweet cherry puree, all from Oregon Fruit Purees. That comes out to be about 2 pounds of fruit per gallon of wort. That's a good ratio, but it does come with some losses, like I said before. That's just why we're brewing a bigger batch than usual. These are sanitary purees, which means I can add them directly into the fermentation without worrying about anything. And I'm going to be using these in the secondary fermentation. I'm gonna brew my entire base beer from start to finish, and once we get towards the tail end of that fermentation, I'm gonna go ahead and add in these 3 pounds each of raspberry, blackberry, and sweet cherry into the beer and let it re-ferment. It's gonna take off again, it's going to do a little bit more fermentation. It'll actually not add that much overall gravity. Because these are purees, they're actually not gonna add as much fermentable sugar as you think they might. Even though I'm adding in 9 pounds of fruit, it's only gonna add about 7 points of overall gravity to the mixture. And this is how we kind of figure out how to calculate our final ABV, by the way, at the end. Long story short, Brewfather is a very good tool for estimating how your gravity is going to look, especially if you're adding something mid-fermentation and you know how much sugar is in it. Either way, when we're adding it in the secondary, this is great because it means that it's going to attenuate a little bit. It's going to have that nice little bit of fruit natural acidity, but also have a lot of natural flavor in it as well. So it's not going to be sour tart, but it's going to be slightly tart relative to a regular beer, but still have a nice juicy character at the end, I hope. It will also turn the beer a really cool color, probably a shade of purple or pink. I'm looking forward to seeing what the final beer looks like because that's always fun. Anyway, guys, I'm really excited to get this thing going. It is going to be a great beer for spring and summer weather that's finally starting to occur. So I'm really happy to get this thing going. Let's go down to the brewery and get started. I started out by adding 8 3/4 gallons of reverse osmosis water into my 10-gallon 240-volt electric brewing system from Clawhammer Supply and started to heat that up to the target mash temperature of 156. While the water was heating up, I measured out all of my water salts and added those into the strike water, and I also milled out all of my grain except for the flaked grains. Those do not need to be milled. Once the water was fully heated up, I mashed in with the entire grain bill, stirring everything up thoroughly and then leaving it at 156 overnight with the pump turned off. The next morning, I came back downstairs, raised everything up to a mash out at 170, and then pulled out the grain basket after letting the mash out sit for about 15 minutes at that temperature. I let the grain basket drain for about 15 minutes as well, while I also subsequently heated up everything to a full boil. Once I reached the boil, I added in my 60-minute hop addition, which was the only hop addition, which was half an ounce of nugget.
I let the boil continue for 50 more minutes, and at the 10-minute mark, I added in the standard Whirlfloc tablet, as well as some yeast nutrient to help with the fermentation. I boiled for 10 more minutes, and then I quickly chilled everything down. As soon as I ended the boil, I took a quick sample for an OG measurement, found it to be only 1 point short of my target at 1069, which is pretty good to see. At this point, I chose to skip the whirlpool because there really wasn't any hot material anyway in the boil, so then I just transferred everything in one pass, chilling through my counterflow chiller in the process, going into my Anvil bucket fermenter, which I have not used in quite some time. Once I collected a little over 6 gallons of wort, I went ahead and put the bucket fermenter in my fermentation freezer to further chill down to the target pitch temperature of about 65. Came back a few hours later, once that remaining 20 degrees had gone down, and I pitched in my 1 packet each of US-05 and L'Allemand Colne and left it to ferment at 65 degrees.
Okay, so now it's time to talk about the fermentation for this beer. And good news is it's really not very complicated at all. The whole point of this is just to get nice, clean, neutral fermentation out of this at a reasonably easy temperature to achieve. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm pitching the California Ale strain in the form of US-05, along with a Kolsch strain in the form of L'Allemand Colne. And the reason for this is because I want to take advantage of the best of both worlds in these yeasts. So being able to get a good, reliable, clean, consistent fermentation and good attenuation with US-05, and at the same time being able to get some nice, subtle fruity esters out that I think will kind of blend very nicely into the berry character that I'm going to be playing with using the Colne yeast, which also has a nice mouthfeel as well that I found. Both of these are very reliable fermenters that are going to do a great job in the mid-60s, and that's exactly where I'm going to ferment this beer. Because US-05 sometimes can throw out a little bit of diacetyl, especially in a higher gravity fermentation like this one, I'm going to be bringing the fermentation temperature down a little bit to about 65 degrees. It'll just be 65 degrees all the way through the fermentation, which will take probably like 1 week, I think, with this much yeast, realistically. And then at that point, I'm gonna add in my 9 pounds of fruit. Once that fruit goes in though, it's just gonna kick off fermentation again, get things started up again, and that's going to result in maybe another 4 or 5 days worth of overall fermentation time, including a little bit of time in the back end to help clean up some of those flavors. Once that's all completed and ready to go, I'm going to transfer it into a keg and take it off of the fruit sludge that'll be definitely present at the bottom of the fermenter. And at that point, it should be pretty much ready to carbonate and drink. It should be a pretty straightforward process. Real quick, some alternate yeast you can use for this one. Honestly, there's a very long list. You just want something basic, clean, neutral, and reliable. So that could be a Kvike strain, for example. I think Voss would be fantastic for this particular style of beer because of the orange note that it provides. I think any sort of variation of English yeast could be really good as well, especially those that kick out some of those fruitier stone fruit kind of esters. You can get great results with things like the Boddington strain, for example. That's going to be London Ale 3, which is notorious in hazy IPAs for a reason. This is basically going to be doing the same thing here, getting a nice ester profile added to the beer. You could also use a wheat yeast on this one, like American wheat is a good option, or even a Hefeweizen strain might be interesting. I don't know if I would go that route though. Could get a little conflicting with a clove. But if you go with one of the genetically modified ones like Bonanza from Omega, it might work out pretty well and be pretty tropical. I'm curious if that would be good. I don't know. Another fun thing you could maybe do with it is take it down the sour route. Minus a lactic acid component, this is extremely close to the recipe you would use for a Midwest fruit tart style of beer. And if you add maybe some Philly sour in there, you could get a pretty solid Midwest fruit tart going just with that addition alone. A little bit of extra acidity in there, of course, is going to really make that fruit pop. You could also kettle sour it if you wish to. I mean, seriously, the world is your oyster with this beer. It all depends on, do you want it to be more acidic? Do you want it to be a little bit more juicy and balanced, or do you want it to just be like a fruit smoothie? Yeast really is one of those ingredients that can just change the final beer so much, and this is one of those scenarios where you get to play around with it a little bit and see what happens. In my case, like I said, I'm just trying to go for a basic, clean, neutral base with a little bit of fluffiness and a little bit of berry, which is why I'm doing what I'm doing, but otherwise, nah, you can do whatever you want. The beer I'm envisioning has a nice, clean, neutral character with some mild berry esters in there, and that's kind of what I'm targeting here, and that's why I'm choosing the yeast I'm using. But if you want to do something different, like, please do. That's part of the fun of homebrewing, is you get to kind of experiment and do your own thing. So let me know in the comments down below what your favorite fruit beer yeasts are and how do they impact things. But yeah, just to recap, I'll be pitching in 1 packet each of USO5 and Lallemand Köln and fermenting this one at 65 degrees for about a week and maybe a little bit longer. And then I'm going to add in my 3 pounds each of raspberry, blackberry, and sweet cherry purees, and I'm going to let it re-ferment. It'll finish that fermentation over another 3 to 5 days. Then I'll get that thing in the keg and get it carbonated up and ready to serve shortly thereafter. I'm looking forward to this beer. I think it's gonna be pretty tasty, so I'll catch you guys when it's all ready. And until then, cheers.
Given that I pitched such a large amount of yeast into this beer, I'm not surprised at all that the fermentation was as fast as it was, getting us to the final gravity of 1013 in a little over 5 days, which is pretty speedy for a beer of this gravity. I was quite happy actually with the flavor of the base beer, but the fermentation was not done quite yet. The next thing I had to do was get the fruit added into the beer. So what I did was I took a second anvil bucket fermenter and sanitized that thoroughly, and then added in my purees to that. That was 3 pounds each of blackberry, raspberry, and sweet cherry purees. Once the purees had been added to the second fermenter, then I transferred the fully fermented wheat beer off of the first fermenter's yeast cake and down into the second fermenter. There was about 1 gallon of puree in the fermenter at this point, so I transferred about 5 gallons of fully fermented wheat beer from the first fermenter into the second fermenter. I was not too concerned about oxygen pickup during this transfer, so I just did a gravity transfer, as it really doesn't matter since the re-fermentation from the fruit purees is going to scrub all the oxygen out anyway. Once I had the beer transferred fully on top of the fruit, I capped up the anvil bucket fermenter and left it to continue fermentation at the ambient temperature in my basement, which at this time of year is about 68 degrees. I let this go for about 3 days, and then before it was fully finished the fermentation, I transferred it into a keg and then closed it up and basically let it continue the fermentation in the keg for the remaining week or so. This not only helped self-carbonate the beer, but also helped scrub any additional oxygen pickup that may have occurred. After about a full week, the beer was completely carbonated and ready to go, so at this point I hooked it up and put it on tap. There's really no easy way to tell exactly how much alcohol the fermentation of the fruit produced, but Brewfather has it at about an extra 1% based on calculated values, so we ended up with a beer of about 8.3% after everything was all said and done. So the beer is called Carry Me Home, and it comes in at 8.3% alcohol and about 17 IBUs. For the appearance of the beer, it is pouring a hazy, reddish-purple, beautiful color. The haze level is not too extreme in this beer, which is actually really nice. It's not opaque to the level of blocking all light. However, it does allow some light in, which helps illuminate that beautiful reddish-purplish color. The head that builds up is a really nice, fluffy construction with a slightly pink tinge to it. And it comes out with some fantastic lacing and just a really nice fluffy setup. So I'm very happy with the way that the wheat and the rye contributed to a really fantastic head construction.
All right, so now let's go in for aroma. The aroma on this beer is nuts. It's just straight berries. There's like, you don't get anything else, but you do get this massive punch of fruit character. Just a really nice, juicy smelling raspberry, blackberry. I don't get as much cherry on the aroma. Maybe a hint of it, but yeah, it's really dominated by the berries, which makes sense. But otherwise, like, this thing is just, it smells like a fruit explosion. Doesn't smell sour, doesn't smell acidic or anything. It is just very juicy, fruity. So now let's go in for mouthfeel. This is absolutely what I was going for. It's got that soft, pillowy, almost creamy character to it. It doesn't feel heavy, it doesn't feel excessive. Still very medium bodied, I would say. No edges to it. Soft and fluffy, really. It's that large amount of rye and wheat in there that's really doing exactly what I designed it to do. In combination, of course, with the deliberate water profile, lots of chloride in there, really makes this thing soft, pillowy, easy to drink. It's not full-bodied, it's medium-bodied, but still soft. So you just get this really nice drinkability to it. No hard edges, no nothing to slow down your drinking experience, besides, of course, 8.3% alcohol. It's carbonated rather highly, I think. I did that on purpose because I want this to be very refreshing and bright. I think the high level of carbonation accentuates the tart fruit flavor and makes it a little bit more easy to drink, makes it a bit lighter, which is nice. So anyway, let's go in for flavor. Dude, this beer is dangerous. It is, there's no telling that this thing is over 8% alcohol. Like, you would not be able to figure that out at all. It's an incredibly clean fermentation, a very, very nice flavor profile now from the fruit. It just brings it so together. First of all, the fruit flavor on this beer is extremely pronounced. Like, this is a fruit salad beer, and there is nothing else. The raspberry, the sweet cherry, the blackberry, I think I can pick all of those out, but the most prominent flavor really for me is the raspberry. Now, this beer is not sweet. It is also not sour. It's like slightly tart, somewhere in between a juicy character and a, you know, nice, pleasant, acidic, sour character. It is a slight tartness to it that is quite reasonable, and it really helps straddle the divide between a bright, acidic flavor and a juicy, full flavor. And it really works really well, in my opinion. Now, the drinkability on this guy is just absolutely crazy. It's nice to me. I don't personally prefer sour beers, so it's actually really nice that this is not a sour beer per se. But the brightness, again, of that fruit flavor really pops with the slight acidity that this has. The acidity is there precisely because of the fruit addition and nothing else. So it's a very pure juice-like acidity. In the aftertaste, you get a little bit of nice, pleasant wheat character to it. Just that slight note of like a wheat bran. Really nice. Helps anchor this and remind you that you're drinking a beer and not fruit juice. There's no real yeast presence in this. And that's good, I think. That's what I was going for. I can't get the like slight berry hint that I was trying to go for from the Kolsch's, but that's kind of overpowered by all the fruit anyway, so that doesn't really make sense, right? No real hop character. This is not something I would have wanted in this beer anyway. I just want it to be nice, gentle, very fruit forward, a little bit of maltiness on it. There's a balance there, but the bitterness that I put in there is really as a baseline, nothing further. You could probably get away with less hops even. This is giving me like wine cooler vibes. It is truly the perfect beer to drink out on the porch when it's 75 degrees outside and the birds are singing and the sky is blue and you got nothing to do. Like, this is perfect. That being said though, there's a few things you can do to play around with it. And I think there's a couple potential improvements I could think about. So first and foremost, I think it'd be cooler to have a little bit more variety in the fruit flavor here. So right now it's just primarily berries and a little bit of a cherry note, but mostly just berry. It would be cool to add something into this like strawberry or maybe even some citrus. I'm not normally an advocate of adding things like a slice of lime to a beer, but this is the kind of beer that absolutely, that would work well in, you know, it turns into a beer cocktail at that point, but it's one of those things that would absolutely work. So yeah, potential improvements, maybe a little bit of fruit variety in here, definitely some strawberry, perhaps like some like mango or some kind of stone fruit could be cool. Another thing that could be kind of fun is playing around with the beer's pH. Now, normally the beer's final pH if it doesn't have anything else added to it and just a standard beer, something like a German lager, for example, should typically be between like 3.9 and 4.2. Now you can mess with the final beer pH a bit by adding either lactic acid or baking soda typically to your final packaging. And by lowering the pH by adding a little bit of acid to it, you will typically brighten the flavors, and you'll lighten the body of the beer, and you will get a little bit of tartness out of that as well. If you go the opposite direction and you raise the pH and add a little bit of baking soda, for example, to the keg, then you start to get a little bit rounder character, softer character, and sometimes you can mute like the brighter flavors and turn them a little bit fuller and richer. Also, if you go too far in that spectrum, the beer begins to taste a little salty. Like it tastes a little bit more like you get that alkalinity burn if you get too much in there. So typically when you adjust the beer's final pH, you only want to go very, very gently in either direction. And always, always, always test it out in a smaller container like a glass of beer versus putting it straight into your keg and committing before you really know what you're doing with the beer. Anyway, what the point I'm making here is with the fruit beer, sometimes the pH change can actually drastically alter the flavors. So, as I said, this is very bright tasting right now. And the reason for that is it's slightly acidic. It's slightly tartar than your typical beer. And that gives it a really nice, rich brightness and a light drinkability that I personally prefer. Now, it's not nearly as acidic as it would be if I had actually used something like a lactobacillus strain or added some, Philly sour or something like that. But it's in a really nice place right now, and I'm not intending to change that at all. Now, if you add a little bit of baking soda to this and you raise the pH a little bit, an interesting thing will happen. This will start to taste a lot more like the unfermented fruit juice. It'll taste sweeter. It'll taste fuller and rounder. And if that's the kind of beer you're going for, then that's certainly a step that you might need to take. Sometimes I tend to poo-poo on fruit beers a little bit, but I'm actually really pleasantly surprised with this one, and I'm actually very, very happy with it. Despite it being exorbitantly expensive, it actually is a very good beer. This is a perfect seasonal opener for spring and summer, and it's definitely like a great porch refreshing beer, and one that I'm gonna be happy I have on tap for quite a while. It'll be interesting to see how it changes and ages. Right now it's quite young, but I think these beers are really at their best when they're fresh. Even with that 8% alcohol, it's a very good beer, and it's enjoyable, and it's hitting the spot right now, and it's exactly what I need right now. So thank you once again, Dave, for your excellent suggestion and your continued support on Patreon. I hope this beer is exactly what you were looking for, and I hope that you brew it yourself and have a similar reaction to me. If you enjoyed this video, learned something, found it useful, just remotely enjoyed it in some way, shape, or form, please go ahead and hit that like button before you click off the video. It means a lot to me. It helps my channel out quite a bit. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below with what your favorite strategy is to make fruit beers. Let me know if there's anything you would have done differently, and if there's anything that you do that makes your fruit beers particularly good. If you want to help support the channel, please consider picking up a t-shirt. You can get this design and plenty of others in my merchandise store, which is linked down in the description box. Now, I have kind of beaten it to death in this video, but I do have a Patreon, and it does have rewards for your support. You get something out of it as opposed to just giving away money, right? So that is still the #1 financial supporter of this channel, and it makes a huge difference, like something I can't even fully describe here. It helps me pay for production quality upgrades, and it helps me keep current with brewing stuff, and it also helps me pay for a lot of miscellaneous business expenses, which, trust me, they add up when you start doing this sort of thing. And of course, being a patron means that you can do stuff like have a beer named after you, and float some ideas my way that I might just take up as well, like I did in this video. So please consider it, check it out. It is seriously an awesome thing. If Patreon is not your thing, and that's totally understandable, I also have channel memberships and the super thanks button as quick and easy ways to help support the channel. All that stuff gets rolled back into the channel just like Patreon. And I also have an Amazon store where you can find my production equipment, my brewing equipment, and all that stuff is available on Amazon, where if you're curious about that, you can purchase it. It's at no additional cost to you, but I do get a small commission, which helps support the channel. And if you want to follow me on more than just YouTube, I'm also active on Instagram and Facebook as The Apartment Brewer. There's a lot of stuff going on in those pages that you don't see on the channel, and you get to see what's coming soon to everybody else. So give them a follow if you get some time. And last but certainly not least, if you're still here, thank you very much for watching all the way to the end of the video. I hope the birds aren't too annoying, but I like bird songs, so I figured it'd be fun to do this outside. Regardless, happy spring, I will catch you all in the next one, and until then, cheers.